I'd like, if you'd be all right with it, that we start with a moment of silent prayer. So let's close the eyes.
And so with eyes closed, looking inward, we begin this edition of Spiritual Journey, together with Brother Elias Marechal, author, contemplative, a former teacher of transcendental meditation, who became a monk and a member of the community of the Monastery of the Holy Spirit in Conyers, Georgia, due east of Atlanta. The monastery was founded in 1944 by 21 Trappist monks from the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky. And like its forebear, it is a place for quiet prayer and contemplation, a perfect setting for the spiritual journey of Brother Elias Marechal to unfold.
Well, it's a deepening. It's a descent into deeper territory of our inner self, my inner self, deeper levels of inner silence.
How did that develop in you?
Well, that's a good question. There's always been a spiritual aspect to me. But in the 60s, we had the different choices. We could go into ashram, Indian. We could go into, the whole civil rights movement, and so forth and so on. So there were a lot of options. And I chose to go the Eastern way. So I became a teacher of transcendental meditation. And in order to do that, we were required to spend 6 months in an island off the coast of Spain called Mallorca. And during the day, we meditated all day. And of course, we had breaks for lunch and for supper, and we were required to go for walks. And then we would have a darshan, or a meeting with the guru. By the way, the word guru is interesting because it's taken from 2 Sanskrit words, gu, which means darkness, and ru, which means light. So authentic guru is a teacher who facilitates the movement from darkness into light, or in our Christian terms, it would be awakening the divine image within us and allowing that image to unfold into likeness, slowly but surely, all the way through. So that as we go along, then spontaneous right action becomes a part of our life. We don't have to think to see, is this the right thing to do or not to do? So we more and more think like Christ, are compassionate the way He is now, and so forth, patient. Because all of the characteristics of God, no matter whether you're Hindu or Christian or Jewish or whatever it is, all people are born with the image of God. And all the characteristics of God are contained within that image. So that when we talk about deepening silence, there already is vast silence in us. But it's a question of allowing it to unfold. We say, well, we want to become patient, but the patience is already there. Kindness, compassion, and so forth.
Jesus, he says, has been and remains a guru to him and an example of radical equality.
In particular, his paradigm, which was very, very basic, of radical equality and inclusivity. That was why he was surrounded by outcasts and marginal people, or the street people of his day, in order to show the radical equality of everyone. But of course, no one really caught on to that. Really, there was a theologian from, I think it was Yale Divinity School, who said that the disciples, for example, thoroughly didn't get it, and when Christ died and ascended, then they had a lot of PR work to do because he hung out with women. They had to explain why he was hanging out with women, with the lepers and everybody. They just didn't get it. And that's been the case, if you look at it historically, nobody's really, very few people have caught on to the radical equality and inclusivity paradigm.
Where did you get it?
Well, I mean, I guess it really became very important for me when I was here. I've been here 21 years. And there was only one other movement that I've ever known that emphasized radical equality, and that is in India in the 16th century, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he founded what we call the Sankirtan movement, in which he invited all people, women, lepers, all castes, to be a part of it. And that was very, very equal, really, equal paradigms, East and West. But I haven't seen it anywhere else. Like Islam, women are like this. And St. Thomas Aquinas said that women are half human because they're not men, and so forth and so on. And you have to have a historical consciousness, and you have to trace everything from the time that Jesus had the paradigm and the way it unfolded, or didn't unfold at all, because then you had the terrible massacre of people who didn't want to convert, and then you had the Inquisition, but then you had pogroms against the Jews continually, and you had all kinds of things. I remember when I was in pre-Vatican days in church on Good Friday, they would ask us to pray for the perfidious Jews, which was really something. And so you look through all the way through, even to this day, women don't have an equal place in many, many places. You know? And so to me, it's very, very important. Like here in the monastery, people are equal. We have different roles. Like I have a job that is in charge of the new people and the people who are inquiring to enter our life. And the abbot has his job.
Tell me about your job working with the novices.
Well, it's beautiful because I have 4 novices, and they're all completing the 2.5-year formation process, and they're all going on to take vows, which is highly unusual. You know. But we emphasize, I teach them basic prayer form, what we call prayer of gratitude, which involves the breath. And the whole idea is that every breath is a gift from God to us. Every out-breath is our gift of that gift back to God.
Brother Elias came to the monastic life later in life, but his view of radical equality began in his earliest years.
I was raised in a European family. My father was a Belgian diplomat, and he stressed radical equality. I didn't even know that there was segregation until I was in 6 or 7 years old. I just didn't, because we had black maids, but they were like members of the family, which is usually what it was in New Orleans. My father used to say, I don't know why we're paying Lily Mae, because she's your mother's confidant. And, really, it was very, very strong. But anyway, he taught me radical equality. We went to a movie once, and there was a very effeminate character in the movie. So I was 7 years old, 8 years old. I came out of the movie and started mocking this effeminate character. And my father said, stop, don't you ever, ever do that again. that man is as beautiful and equal as the rest of us. And that really taught me something right there. And but he was very much for equality, absolutely. So he really instilled that in me, so that that's how it's been.
During our interview, Brother Elias expressed deep sorrow over humanity's history of oppression based on religion, ethnicity, race. And he says meditation can contribute to the healing.
I think more and more people who in prayer or meditation go deep, because when you go deep and you go beyond the boundaries of thought, image, everything, and you go into spaciousness with no beginning in time, edges in space, then you're touching all of humanity. And so if you reach a point where you have a lot of people, more and more people doing that, then they'll affect the atmosphere. But as long as people remain at a level of discursive prayer or meditation, then it's wouldn't go as fast. But we have to have beautiful activists like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Christ. And that you have to have a strong leadership to bring out the best. There was the whole, like in our society right now, there's a paradigm that's accepted by a number of people. And it has to do with my value and my identity depend on what I do and what other people think of me, which is very, very not too good.
Though he began to grow spiritually in his youth, in college at the University of Notre Dame, he had a mystical experience that transformed him.
At our introduction to the university by a Holy Cross Father, he emphasized the Grotto. And the Grotto is a replica of the Grotto at Lourdes, where people are healed and so on. And so I was very impressed with what he was saying. It was freshman orientation. And it caught on in my soul, and once in class one day I said, I'm going to check out the Grotto. So it was the fall. So I went in the late afternoon. Shadows were starting to form, and the birds their singing had died down. And so I made my way to the Grotto. There was only a handful of people there. I expected hordes of people because we had all of these tourists all over the map, of the university. So I went and knelt near somebody, and before I knew it, my tongue felt heavy, as though if I wanted to speak, I could not speak. And it was as though all the faculties shut down. In other words, thinking, feeling, imagining, everything. But the tongue was the thing that really caught me. Then, instantly, I started to sink internally. And I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes later, I opened my eyes. It seemed like less than a half of a second. But it was not a second at all, it was eternity. And Thomas Merton writes about the same experience in one of his books. He says, I was sitting with my eyes closed, and suddenly it was as though a trap door opened out up into the center of my being, and I fell into stellar space. And this space is endless love. Okay. And so from there, I didn't know what was going on. I was a kid, teenager. So I didn't tell anybody about it because I thought that, they're really weird, And so I hadn't been much in terms of going to Mass in the dorm. But we had the Holy Cross Fathers who ran the place came up with what they thought was an ingenious solution of how to get the students to go to Mass. And we had dawn patrol, which meant that you had to sign in at a desk by 6 o'clock. Otherwise, you were penalized. But in order to get to the desk, you had to pass by the chapel. So what we did was sign in, we'd go back to bed. But the next day after that event in the Grotto, I went in to sign in, and then I started walking past the chapel and went past it, and then at the foot of a flight of stairs, I stopped and I went back. And I stood by the entrance, and there was a statue of Mary there, and I looked into her eyes and she looked into mine. And for some reason I whispered, "Thank you." And I walked into the church, into the chapel. And I went to church, went to the Mass every day after that. Then really this experience didn't occur anymore in my college days. But then I went into the seminary to become a priest. Because in those days, if you wanted to be holy, according to Catholics, well, you had to be a priest, So you really want to be holy, this is it. So I went.
At seminary, he had another mystical experience. Then, after entering a Trappist monastery, he had yet another. And that's when Brother Elias decided he could no longer keep these experiences a secret.
So I found a wise old monk, and I said, "I've got to see you." And I said, "This is what's been happening." And he says, "Oh, really?" Like it was no big deal. He says, "Well, good." And I looked at him and says, "Well, what's this all about?" And he says, "Well, it's contemplation." Well, I'd heard about the word contemplation, but I heard St. John of the Cross and all these people, and I didn't investigate it because that was for holy, holy people. And he looked at me and he says, "It's not for holy people, it's for anybody." Because he said there are two kinds of contemplation. One is called infused contemplation, which is what I was getting. Infused means out of the blue, with no warning, no preparation. You're zapped, as it were. Okay? The other is acquired contemplation, which means you're sitting very quietly, let's say in a church or a synagogue or whatever it might be, and suddenly you start feeling quieter, but you're prepared for it. You've done something. You've gone to the synagogue. You've been sitting, and it happens. So I said, "Well, what about the tongue?" He said, "Oh, that's what we call the ligature." I said, "Ligature? What's a ligature?" He says, "Ligare, to bind." That means all the senses are bound. And then, totally spirit. In other words, you sink. And I said, "Oh, I see. So that's what, yeah, of course that's all about." And "You didn't know this, lad?" I said, "No, I didn't know this." He says, "You kept this to yourself all this time, yeah?" Mm-hmm. So now, when I occasionally I'll talk about it on a retreat, and I've had people come up to me after the retreat and say, "I've carried this around as a burden because I thought I was having epilepsy or something. And thank God that you told me that."
And the mystical experiences continue, though now they are welcome.
It's almost like a state that I'm living in. There's unboundedness, this infinity. And so, I don't say this to say that I'm special, but it's just many, many years of living, you know, the deeper life ends up with it becomes who you are, you know, in a sense. You're sharing divinity. And so, yeah, I mean, sometimes there'll be different manifestations of that, but underneath there's a deep silence that doesn't change. And sometimes, yeah, I'll have all of a sudden I'll drop down, but I don't have the tongue anymore, any of those manifestations.
Brother Elias speaks openly about how undiagnosed restless leg syndrome kept him from getting enough sleep, making monastic life difficult. So he went on to teach transcendental meditation, then high school, and when he was drawn to joining a monastery again, he consulted a neurologist.
And so the neurologist said, you know, it's a good thing that this happened at this time. I said, why? He said, because if you hadn't caught it within 5 years, you would have been exhibiting AIDS-like symptoms. So I wouldn't be sitting here at this moment talking with you. But that was providential. I mean, I see providence operating all the time in my life. It's almost, it's incredible. I feel like I'm being moved around all day long. You know, I'm at the right spot, the right people, somebody comes up, and it just all fits together as a congruence.
And it was congruent, in harmony, that the man born Paul Marechal should choose to be called Brother Elias, from the biblical Elijah, whose stories he learned through the Jewish tradition of Midrash, stories that explain and offer interpretations of Scripture.
Besides the fact that it's a beautiful name, I learned about Elias through the Midrash. And in the Midrash, it claims that he was very violent, and God said, look, I didn't send you there to kill the prophets. I didn't send you there to be violent with the people. I sent you there just simply to deliver my message, and you're not doing it. So he wanted to commit suicide, and the angel said, no, you're not going to get off that easy, Elias. So they gave him food. So he went to Mount Horeb, I think, and heard the sound of the quiet wind and so forth. But the reality was that he was uncontrollable. And God said, I can't do anything with this man. And so he said, the only thing I can do is just take him out of the world. And that's when the fiery chariot came. But the fiery chariot, fire means love, but it also means intense purification. So he was snatched up out so that he was no longer in control. And now he disappears into the pages of history. And after a while, he starts showing up. And the first appearance was as a prostitute. And he ministered to the prostitutes through this prostitute. He was a prostitute because he had persecuted prostitutes terribly. Then the next thing, he shows up in another guise and another guise. And so of all the people that he's persecuted, which means that he was really purified. And I thought, this is a model.
Do you see
Because
yourself as uncontrollable? Or
no. That I needed ongoing purification. And in Catholicism, they call it purgatory. But it's ongoing, that we're being purified continually. And refined in the fire. I speak to the novices about their being in the furnace of Babylon, an ancient saying in the old monastic tradition. In other words, intense purification is very, very important. And so I saw in the figure of Elias someone who was purified, and what happened eventually. That, and it's going to take my going into the next world to be purified to the nth degree. And, he went into the other world, and he came He was purified to the nth degree, and then he came back. So that was, that to me was a model of someone who, undergoing purification. And that's what I want. When I entered here, when I had an interview with someone, the monk said, "Why do you want to come here?" And he expected me to say, "Oh, I want to find God," or "I want to be a saint." I said, "I want to be stretched." Stretched? What do you mean stretched? I said, I had it made outside. I was living in an artist colony in Louisiana. So, population 7,000 with 15 art galleries. I was a writer. I had published one book. I was working on another. I had a great circle of friends, a wonderful social life. I had everything I wanted. Money. But I could do anything I wanted. And I knew that I had to be purified. And so I said, that's why I want to come here.
And like the biblical Elijah, Brother Elias admits he had a past.
Well, I belonged to, in high school and college, I belonged to a gang. But it wasn't really a gang. It was kind of like a group of pretty rough characters. And I was kind of that. And you wouldn't believe it, but yeah. I went to jail like 3 times. And my father, I had diplomatic immunity, so my father bailed me out of jail. Once I went up to, we had a party in a hotel, and of course, it was wild, and we had too much to drink, and a friend of mine and I went down to the desk, and I said, "Okay, lady, hand over the money," and I've got a gun underneath here. And my friend ran, and then all of a sudden, the police were there around me and said, "Okay, son," and I said, "You can't do anything because I have diplomatic immunity." See, I was a Belgian citizen I had dual nationality. And so my poor father, that's one of the things that I really had to be purified when I came here. Dragging him out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning. That was an arrogant person.
An arrogant person who perhaps became humble as his spiritual journey continued.